Ugh. While being absolutely disgusting, honestly, have you ever seen human entrails look so good? Actually, don't answer that. But yes, Resident Evil 2 Remake is here briefly to play in a short 30-minute, one-shot demo. There's scarcely enough time to get an impression, let alone really catch a breath before the game launches in full in 2 weeks on January 25th. Along with this demo's brevity, I'm not sure how up-to-date this build is, given how the demo that John and I played at EGX Berlin in September of 2018 looked mighty similar to this one, even with a timer there. Given how previous entries such as Resident Evil 7 also made great strides between demo and release, we will then save the more rigorous analysis for an actual release. With that being said, that does not mean we're looking at some sort of unpolished old product here. No, sir. This is looking mighty fine indeed, if you ask me, on all platforms as is. This is largely due to the RE engine, or Reach for the Moon engine, we have seen in other Capcom titles such as Resident Evil 7 and Devil May Cry 5. Since this game is targeting lower frame rates on the base consoles this time around, unlike Resident Evil 7, we're seeing some effects here in Resident Evil 2 Remake that were really rare or only found on the PC version of Resident Evil 7. All versions of Resident Evil 2 Remake showcase a filmic per object motion blur. Each surface that is smooth enough receives screen space reflections, and the game makes extensive use of volumetric lighting and a bokeh depth of field. I'll wait till the full version here comes out to make the call, but those volumetrics look quite a lot like the Frustum voxel-aligned type that we've seen in many games this generation, giving every and any light the chance to illuminate a fog volume. Probably best seen here with the volumetric halo surrounding these lamps. When all these effects are combined together in this short demo, we're looking at an incredibly atmospheric and smooth looking game. And that's really just the environments. Character modeling as showcased in this demo is also top-notch, with realistic animations both in and out of cutscenes, and a lot of weight and physicality, like how Leon S. Kennedy's boy band hair bobs back and forth as he trudges down dark hallways, or how zombies rebound when affected by non-kill gunshots. The game developers and Capcom's R&D Division 1 also really seem to know how good their character models are, as when you bring the camera close to Leon, it seems to spawn a tight shadow casting light directly above his head, following that camera. This spawned-in light looks to accentuate the lifelike details of the player model. Sure, it isn't exactly physically correct to have the light spawn in and out of nowhere in a dark hallway just because the camera is close to Leon, but hey, it makes the character model look nice, and I bet you really didn't even notice it. While the game's internal artwork looks rather stunning, how it performs and at which resolution it renders at is going to be very different depending upon which platform you play it on. As it is currently in the demo, the Xbox One base console and PS4 base console look to be outputting and having that final resolution of rendering being 1080p, or 1920 by 1080. But with the caveat the Xbox One version apparently is reconstructing to that 1080p from a yet-to-be-determined lower resolution. I say yet to be determined because the game has extremely aggressive TAA. Also, there are inconsistencies that we do not expect when counting pixels. To count resolution, you generally need straight edges, and a general lack of post-processing on top of those pixels, so that they are raw. The best way to do that in a game that uses TAA is to count the pixels on a straight edge right after an immediate camera cut. So here, for example, on the PS4, we're getting native pixel edges, which could be easily seen by dropping the image into any editor and just zooming in, and how those consistent straight edges for pixel counting line up with the pixel grid of the software. Even without consistent straight edges in this image, the resolution makes itself obvious in the hair, where you can see per pixel detail. Well, on Xbox One, when I switch over, that image after the frame cut is much softer in general on opaque objects, and the hair looks, quite frankly, pretty rough. This is just after the frame cut though, and the TAA and reconstruction help to blend it up to a more pleasant looking 1080p over a few frames. Just look at the difference on frame 1 after the cut versus one a few frames later. As I say this though, that same reconstruction is not evidenced everywhere, as a frame cut sometimes does not show this, and in fact counts up to a proper 1080p on a full linear edge, like here when the frame cuts to this computer monitor. So at the moment I will say the PS4 is a native 1080p, and obviously so, while the Xbox One is reconstructed up to that, either parts of the image all the time like the hair, or all of the image but just some of the time. Here we will wait for the final game release to have more examples and visible camera cuts that are less obscured by depth of field to make that proper determination. Switching over to those beefier elite consoles, we see a different story where we are counting up to 1620p or 2880 by 1620 for both PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, with elements of the image looking like they're being reconstructed, such as the hair as we mentioned earlier. It's easy to determine this because we can compare with the PC version at that same resolution, which looks different. Beyond that, the only differences we can determine out of this demo between the console versions on a pure visual level would be the slightly different look to certain post-processing elements, such as depth of field and screen space reflections, presumably owing up to differences in rendering resolutions, which it is probably tied to. Even with that in mind, the PS4 Pro's depth of field and screen space reflections in the exact same frame cut as the Xbox One X, and they're running at the same resolution, well, those depth of field and SSR effects look a bit chunkier on PS4 Pro. So perhaps that is where the more powerful GPU of the Xbox One X is currently being leveraged in this demo. But maybe these differences will change for release, with the Xbox One X having a different implementation by then, or PS4 Pro even. If you do want something a bit higher end right now though, you can get that by moving on over to PC, where it is possible to get an enhanced experience if your hardware is up to the task. I will most definitely be going into this with great detail when I cover the PC version in around 2 weeks' time, but as a preview, I can already say that we're looking at a frankly amazing graphical options menu here, with image previews and a lot of tweaking potential. Don't you just love a great graphics option menu? Just as a tip though, ignore that GPU memory bar and any warnings the demo may give you about performance. According to the demo, it would be using an excess of 13 or so gigabytes of VRAM at 4K, with everything cranked. Yet, in-game, the numbers from RiverTuner's statistics server on-screen display tell a very different story. A cursory glance putting the best of the Xbox One X next to the PC version at 4K maxed shows already some great strides above the Xbox One X, with higher resolution volumetrics available on PC and more accurate screen space ambient occlusion thanks to the addition of HBAO+. Also, higher rendering resolution generally means a knock-on for other effects, like screen space reflections, which has smaller blocky chunks on PC, but honestly, some reason they just look less cohesive, so hopefully that is remedied in the end by release. With that being said, not everything is perfect of course in this demo, as there were 3 other things that caught my eye on PC that I really hope are not there in the final product. The first one was animation time slicing. Given the game's FPS targets on consoles, which I will dive into shortly, animations go down to half rate at certain distances from the player camera. On console this makes sense, to save performance on their weaker CPUs, but on PC, a tweakable option above that which can be seen on console would be really greatly appreciated, especially since the game right now, and this demo, is so light on the CPU when targeting 60 FPS. It just feels wrong seeing a half-rate animation in a game which has so few character AI on the screen on one time, especially on PC. And like these half-rate animations, there were a handful of times where engaging in an animation with a zombie caused the game camera or animation rate in total of everything to look half-rate while the game was still rendering out at a flat 60. Strange and hopefully just a bug that will be fixed on release. The last thing that caught my eye here on PC that needs to be fixed at release was DirectX 12. Just do not run the game in DirectX 12 at all at the moment. Regardless of GPU vendor, AMD, Nvidia, or GPU type, you will see a degradation in performance when utilizing DirectX 12. Heck, just sitting here in this room in the opening saw a 23% performance drop when going from DirectX 11 to DirectX 12 on an RTX 2080 Ti. And even when testing out a presumed advantage of the API by trying to make the game CPU bound at 540p, both the GTX 1060 and RX 580 saw very large performance drops on DX12. This on top of a hitch here or there which was not found in DX11. If DX12 does aid CPU performance in this game, at the moment, well, I'm not seeing it, and I imagine that the problems it has for the GPU will get in the way in the first place. Hopefully the final game sees a much more mature DX12 implementation that improves on performance, especially since the game is reported to support ray tracing perhaps, although we have yet to confirm it as is. It would be a shame to lose performance while using something like ray tracing just because the DX12 implementation is lackluster. Performance-wise, the consoles are doing rather well, with a caveat that definitely needs to be mentioned. When benching them side by side in a run through the first level, you can see how the Xbox One X and PS4 Pro perform incredibly, targeting 60 FPS and by and large hitting that really well, minus a few light blips here and there on the frame time gap that I would imagine just come from streaming in assets. Beyond that little quirk, in general you're looking at a fantastic 60 FPS in gameplay for this on the higher end consoles, only with some smaller dips into the 50s in some cutscenes basically. Awesome performance in general. Then you move to the base consoles, where PlayStation 4 and Xbox One are running that same unlocked frame rate up to 60, but sadly not coming close. The PlayStation 4 in general is in the 40s for most of the play and sometimes managing to be in the low 50s, while the Xbox One is primarily just above 30 with some spikier moments into the low 40s. Given the visuals on display here, I'm still pretty impressed with the performance we're seeing here, especially on PlayStation 4. If the CPU is not the bottleneck in the end, I imagine a 900p mode on PS4 could be a pretty sweet 60 FPS experience actually. Still, while an unlocked frame rate is preferred by some, we cannot stress it enough to Capcom that an optional frame rate cap with proper frame pacing at 30 FPS is really greatly needed for this title on base consoles. To our eyes, unlocked V-synced frame rates hovering in these ranges look pretty jerky on 60Hz displays, and the game's slick, filmic look is not aided at all when there is an uneven cadence to motion. A proper and perhaps optional 30 FPS cap is therefore greatly needed in the final release. Going over to PC at the highest settings, both the RX 580 and GTX 1060 fall very short of being able to play the game at 4K. And like I said earlier, even though the menu is screaming to me about VRAM utilization, both the RX 580 and surprisingly the GTX 1060 even manage to play at 4K at these low frame rates without extra induced texture swap stutter from going over VRAM budgets. So there was no hitching. The game does a pretty good job of keeping within VRAM limits and not spilling out to induce stutter. Moving down to that same resolution that the Pro consoles use of 1620p but without reconstruction, it shows that the RX 580 and GTX 1060 are coming much closer to obtaining a proper 60 FPS, with that RX 580 faring a bit better on average obviously. This will change on release and with launch drivers and final code, but if the demo is any proper indication, 1620p could be pushed up closer to 60 just by turning on the volumetrics quality, or dropping to a standard SSAO as found on consoles, basically looking more similar to console settings but without their reconstruction. If you are targeting 1440p, which is more likely than 1620p, then those same sacrifices of settings apply there, but you would have more headroom in the end. 1080p maxed is incredibly doable on both these GPUs at 60 FPS, and in general with much higher frame rates, which is perfect for those of you running a variable refresh rate display. But what about 4K, you may ask? Well, the RTX 2080 Ti does a pretty amazing job at 4K, in just about every single scene with the game maxed out. There is one point though where I managed to see a GPU related drop, and that's in the hallway when going back from our bisected friend to Marvin. Here, the sheer amount of volumetric lighting on screen at the highest volumetric lighting setting seems to push the GPU over the edge, and 60 FPS becomes unattainable. Given how precise that volumetric lighting looks, basically to the point of decadence, I think it's okay to drop their quality. But that's just now. I'll have much more in-depth look at the game's performance, especially for its individual settings on release. So there you have it. As is, even this demo version of the game in a presumably outdated build, well, it looks frankly amazing. Beyond some blemishes like an uncapped frame rate on PS4 and Xbox One, or a lacking DX12 implementation at the moment, every version looks fantastic. I especially look forward to diving in with great detail on the PC version in late January to figure out how it ticks. The demo's quality as is makes me think it's going to be a very special game. But that's enough from me for now. If you did enjoy this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're already a subscriber, please consider hitting that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to talk to me about Resident Evil 2's rendering, or just rendering in general, write a comment below or follow me and Digital Foundry on Twitter. As always, this is Alex, bidding you farewell, und auf Wiedersehen.